Good evening, everyone. And on behalf of the American Center in Moscow, for joining us today. My name is Amira Tulkhanova, and I'm the host of Meet the Poet series and a literary enthusiast from Moscow, Russia. And today, I'm honored to welcome to our series a very young but already a very famous and prolific poet, Sophia Hall. Sophia Hall's writing has been recognized by the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards, the Library of Congress, and several other organizations. Her poem, Multiple Choice, won grand prize in 16 River Press's Youth Poetry Contest and was subsequently nominated for the Pushcart Prize. In 2022, she won the Smith College Poetry Prize for High School Girls, selected by Leila Chatty. Sophia is also the Arts and Social Justice Fellow at Threadmore Art Center and Woolly Mammoth Theatre Company. Her haiku, selected from 2,900 plus submissions from 71 countries, have been displayed in prominent locations in the Washington, D.C. business district. She posts her writing and artwork on her Instagram account, Estelle Euphoria, reaching an audience of over 100,000 users. She'll be attending the University of Pennsylvania in the fall, where she was recruited for creative writing. And tonight, Sophia is going to read her poems to us, and after that, we'll open the floor to your questions. You can drop them in the chat, and I'll be happy to share them with our poet during the Q&A. And I'd also love to know that our team at AMC has posted on social media the link to the poems that will be read tonight, accompanied by their side-by-side Russian translation, so you can read along. And Sophia, welcome to Meet a Poet.
Thank you, Samira. So happy to be here.
We're happy to have you.
So the first poem that I have to read is called This Title is Just an Open Doorway, and it's kind of a metaphor for how the title of a poem invites you into the rest of the poem. And I wanted it to be the first poem that I read today because I want to invite you all onto this poetry journey with me. So here goes. This title is just an open doorway. Please, come in from the cold. Let me hang your burdens by the fireplace and shelve your damp mittens on the mantel. Snowflakes tumble as you remove your scarf. They dissolve into a small puddle that the dog laps at, grateful for a drink. Slip off your sturdiness. Leave the winter boots next to the jumble of soccer cleats and house slippers. Yes, the boys are about your age. They're out shoveling. They have no curfew. Later, they might build an igloo and store beer in the solid ice, forming their own semi-haven. Sit on the old armchair, its worn leather soft as simile. An untuned piano stands in the corner, its ivory keys chatter like old friends, like what you and I might become if you decide to stay here in this land. Dark chocolate melts on the stove. Have a cup. Swallow the rich night. Sleep a while. Take my bedroom or one of my sons. They won't mind. They are good, soft boys. Their pictures line the walls as you walk up the staircase to the next flat line of floor. The hardwood creaks. When dawn breaks like a stanza, maybe the snow will have slowed. You'll leave into the brisk crispness, and this house will collapse with just the wind of a page flip. When it begins to snow again, perhaps you'll return to this dark smudge in the white. Through the window where I'll wait, I'll wave and welcome you. There's something warm here. Come smell, come taste, come dream. Thank you. This poem is kind of a meta poem because it incorporates all the elements of poetry that I use, like figurative language of simile and metaphor within it. And as you can see, I talk about dawn breaking over the horizon like a stanza, and then the poem quite literally takes a stanza break. So I had a lot of fun writing this tongue-in-cheek, self-referential poem. This next poem is called The Garlic Eaters, and it's about when I get sick, and my mom always suggests that I eat garlic because of its healing properties and to make sure that I get healthy and more well super fast. So here goes The Garlic Eaters. My mother splits the quilt of dark earth, the undug clumps of garlic clusters like dove skulls. She pulls apart the bulbs and crushes a clove underneath the flat side of a knife. The skin peels off an exoskeleton of white shell. A piano note decays the moment human weight plays it, all life in perpetual rot. I lay in bed, cough staccato, fever crescendo, voice quarter rest. My molars crunch the cloves she feeds me, her fingers finding my mouth and brushing my lips, scaling a major key. So it's about the love between a mother and a daughter. And I also was inspired to incorporate a lot of elements of piano and music into it because at the time I was practicing piano and my teacher told me that the moment you press a note on a piano, it starts decaying. So I was thinking about how when I was sick, it kind of felt like my whole body was decaying because I was just sitting in my bed and I couldn't do anything. The next poem incorporates a lot of Greek mythology elements in it. It's attributed to Poseidon, and it's about the Poseidon Medusa myth. And the fun thing about this poem is that it takes the form of a guzzle, which is an ancient Middle Eastern form of poetry that has couplets that all end with the same word or a similar word. So this one is called Gorging, Guzzle. Your guttural guitar strum I gorge on, my snake tamer mother calls me Gorgon. Throat constricts around the sound of pleasure. Your sonnets fill my belly full, that rich lie in my gullet. It descends ambrosia dry down my gorge. I rattle home in the rail car cold. My mother observes, hisses, stop gorging. So instead, I obsess over the words of our conversations. I myself gorge until I too become a stone carcass that carnivorous creatures will gorge on. I whittle body to desert bone, so men like you look and call me gorges. Midnight, your red smeared mouth, a dark gorge. Pomegranate seeds bleed like I gorged with the vultures of Death Valley. I pitch off the slick edge into black, a steep gorge. Don't gauge your steel temper and don't gouge God death wounds until I become a gorge. With the heavy work of speaking my no. Time flows through Medusa like a river. Medusa is fat nothing. She is gorged. Another one of the aspects of a guzzle is that the last couplet always incorporates the speaker's name. So if I was writing a guzzle, I would usually incorporate my name, Sophia, into the last two lines of it. But since I was writing from the voice of Medusa, I decided to use Medusa's name in the last two lines instead. And also there's a little play on words, a pun in the, the sixth to last stanza where call me gorges. I was inspired to write that because of this joke that people have about Cornell University. Cornell is located in Ithaca, New York, which has a lot of gorges, natural, in the natural landscape. There's just a lot of pitfalls and holes, but it's actually a very beautiful area. So it's also gorgeous and at the same time. And now I have another guzzle that I'm going to read for you. It's called and it's actually very fitting that I'm reading this poem right now because just over a week ago, my grandmother on my paternal side just passed away from a heart attack. So there's a lot of grief attached to this poem, Tooth Guzzle, and I'm also going through the grieving process right now as well. Tooth Guzzle. Tooth. And we placed him inside a dark box, like a tooth under my linen pillowcase, swapped a $20 bill. Now the tooth is valued at an average of 471 cents. He fought nail and tooth as the tumor in his stomach grew roots and the food at his table no longer needed teeth. That morning, my mother slept, but then I woke and saw crowded in her wet mouth dozens of teeth, like the ones found in sediment that was once shallow ocean 260 million years, that survived mass extinction even when the bodies could not. My brother, his namesake, was still teething and latched onto my mother at the funeral. I stayed home and played ivory keys, once the teeth of a great tusked animal. My mother photographs memories on sepia, but exposing my pearls sparks fear. So in the bathroom glass, I practice eating myself with my own teeth, like a baleen whale some krill, joy from brine. I forgot to brush my gold-crowned mouth makes me royalty. The Novocaine numbs not just my tooth, but my entire meaning. Sophia means wisdom like a pearl, but that quality was removed along with those teeth. I wonder if my mother regrets the reminder of all that I am not. Our words bite with sharp teeth, like those of the dress that does not zip over her hips. The cat holds a bird in its teeth as an apology. Forgiveness is wise enough. I tell her when pink lipstick stains her white teeth, and she wipes the fault away with her finger. Blame on both sides. So we hold onto this fragile world by the skin of our teeth. Thank you. And if you don't mind, I'm going to take a sip of my water right now. It's sparkling water. I love water, especially San Pellegrino, but this is Perrier. I don't really think there's a difference, but it's just so yummy to me. So the next poem I'm going to read is called How to Live on the Dead, and it's inspired by my own backyard, and I also had fun. You can see it's the title is taken from a line in the poem How to Live on the Dead, line break, and street. So it also has a double meaning about living on the memories of our ancestors and rebuilding and continuing to thrive in spite of their deaths and because of that. How to Live on the Dead. My mother was born the year of the rabbit, and this April my house has become a warren of cottontails. On Thursday, they scamper in backyard clover, spooked by my sneakered steps in the twinkling dusk. Empty egg cartons, chicken gizzards, contraband Milky Way wrappers. Let me speak clear. Backyard means a dozen squared feet, littered with broken things. Terracotta pots, shoelace streams bunny looped like my brother's Adidas hoops, and the rocket launch pad of a rusty trampoline. We lay on the unbounced top to watch stars puncture the black of night, while bunnies seek shelter underneath. And knocked over watering cans they lurk, noses sniffling, then scatter when my mother shouts, "Soup's ready." We, soft prey of sorrow and salt, scurry to her side. We serve each other, paws pressed around ladles, long ears straight to the floor. The rabbits have taught me to live on the dead end street, to love inside the rot, to look up of light. Right now it's June, and there are still a lot of bunnies scampering around my neighborhood, and it brings me so much joy to see them in a neighbor's lawn or hiding in the alley. There's actually a lot of wildlife in my neighborhood unexpectedly. Just 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was standing in my neighbor's front lawn, and we live sort of near a forest, so it makes sense how the deer got there, but I was really surprised to just see it walking through the neighbor's lawns. So now we heard my piano that I used to play all the time when I was younger, which I kind of alluded to in the beginning with the Garlic Eaters poem when I incorporated a lot of piano imagery into it. This one is called Standup because I played a stand-up piano, but the piano is really funny, and this poem is kind of humorous, so it's kind of like a stand-up comic as well. Stand up. He never leaves the living room. Old geezer. His keys sneeze with dust, wheezes out for Elise, needs a wash day ring. Speaks, "See you later, alligator major," and "Gee, aren't you sharp?" Serves as elevated surface for rusty family photos where every forced smile feels framed. Self-elected junk receptacle, unpaid bills, receipts, open envelopes not quite ready for the trash bin. Lonely. Knick-knacks on the fake mantle, skeleton of black electric violin, battery candles patterned like paper birches, dozen dying roses, eclectic collection of kitsch, fake wood, boasts scars from battles with 6-year-old sticker habits, and then iron wool scrub. Creaks as the cover opens and closes. Damper petals, swooshes and shushes. Lets out a fantastic crack of flatulence. A real stand-up guy, but too old for the market. So yeah, out of all the poems I've written, I think that's one of the funniest ones, and it shows that poetry can have a humor to it. At least not all of my poetry has to be sad or kind of contemplative. But now we're going to go back into the contemplative mood with Postcard from Roosevelt Island. I've written a few postcard poems before, and I think a quality of postcard poems is that they're tied to a specific geographic place or a specific place in your memory. And this past April, which was National Poetry Month in the US, I taught a workshop at Politics and Prose, which is a local bookstore in my hometown of Washington, D.C. And it was all about postcard poetry, where I invited the people workshop to think about a lot of time in but no longer went to, and to write about that, or to write about their favorite vacation spot. And they produced some really excellent postcard poems. And this was a postcard poem that I wrote from Roosevelt Island, which is a little island that doesn't allow any cars in or out in the middle of New York City, which is really fabulous. It's kind of its own isolated haven within the city. It's on the East River, and the way that I got to it is by taking this tram that flies over the East River and deposits you safely onto the island. And I really enjoyed walking up and down the length of the island next to the river and just observing all of the people around me. New York is a very interesting place. But one of the most interesting things that was happening while I was visiting this island was that across the river in Manhattan, I could see fire from the top of an apartment building. I could see the orange flames billowing up and into the sky, and all this smoke pouring out of a building. And it was really scary, and I didn't know what was going on. And then I saw all of these fire trucks with their alarms blaring to come help the people that were in the apartment building. And I was glad to see that there was help on the way, but I felt like such a bystander. I was all the way across from the river. There was nothing I could do to help, but I could see this horrific thing that was happening to me, happening to other people all the way across the river. So even that moment, there was something in the environment that was very disruptive. Postcard from Roosevelt Island. Sit, if only for a moment. Rest your whisper of a body upon this bench. Listen. The bullfrog croak, low and morose. The red tram floats through blue. Bicycles whir and click wild. Rosemary rises from sidewalk cracks. The ferry wakes you out of dusk slumber. The young maple stirs an evening breeze. Across the East River, sirens cluster underneath a burning high-rise, like a thicket of bleeding currents. As water drowns sky, fishermen gather, slice up heads of haddock, cast away their lines. They dredge up poison. Whole lifetime dissolved into ghost gray smoke. The pine wood stand-up piano, the pre-K palm painted portrait. The city yawns. You observe, distant, the passing by shadow of flying geese. My outside environment, or is also referential to other poets. So the very last line, Flying Geese, references a very famous Mary Oliver poem. And Mary Oliver is a Pulitzer Prize winning poet who writes so beautifully. I really admire her. And the very first line of this poem, sit, if only for a moment, was the inscription in one of the park benches that was lining the walk that I was taking along the island. So other things were like dedications to people, like for Jimmy, Love, Maria, or people inscribed quotes from famous people that they wanted to have on the benches. But this one bench just had sit, if only for a moment. And I loved that it just was so welcoming to allow people to take a brief rest. And I also talked about the stand-up piano in this poem because I was imagining someone's life going up in flames and I was lose. This next poem is very powerful. I wrote it when I was studying Cézanne's paintings in Aix, which is in the south of France. And Paul Cézanne is a famous Impressionist painter. He painted a lot of the Mont Saint-Victor, which is in Aix. And so when I was studying there, and I was studying his paintings for a month the summer before my senior year, I got to paint the Mont Saint-Victor. I also was copying from master painters. So I looked at a Vincent van Gogh painting, and I was trying to imitate the lines. And I was also looking at Paul Cézanne's paintings myself and trying to copy them. And one of his famous series is a series of the wilderness and being free to be themselves. And I was thinking about the implications of Paul Cézanne going out and watching these women who are, thinking that they're alone and in a moment of privacy, and then kind of violating it with his brushstrokes. And my own experience in the south of France and kind of being able to be a woman on my own. And I took it upon myself to write in the voice of these bathers without the possession of Cézanne upon them. And I wrote this fun little poem. The Bathers. Tonight, worried about the shedding of antlers. Instead, we sit on the edge of a fountain with our feet rippling in stars like the hunters of Artemis. We are Cézanne's bathers without the artist's possession, no outside gaze inflicted, our nakedness entirely our own, and to hold without apostrophe. So that was kind of about like female coming of age, being on the edge of a fountain while also being on the edge of womanhood. And then these hunters of Artemis, they all carry bows, which are notched, and then the arrows are flung. So and the shape of a bow is kind of like a crescent. So that's why I described their bodies as being crescent, notched, and flung. Then this next poem is called Colorado Trail in the Rocky Mountains of, you guessed it, Colorado. It was really exciting because I was backpacking in the Rocky Mountains for 5 weeks with a group of other people, and I really experienced what it was like, really self-sufficient, to make your own food on the campfire, to camp along the Continental Divide, which literally divides the United States water in the outdoors, which was really magical. And a lot of the elements in this poem reference Colorado, the landscape that I observed, all of the paper birch trees, lodgepole pines, the lichen. There were many, many lakes, and the state flower of Colorado is the columbine flower, which you should look it up. It's a purple and white or a blue and white flower with really quite remarkable. And I was so excited whenever I would walk through fields of wildflowers I think they were called like paintbrush flowers, because they just were so wild and vivid. And then I would be equally as whenever I saw a columbine. So that just is kind of a landscape of this poem that we're navigating. Colorado Trail. My lichen hair and mossy feet, pressing down fallen trees like piano keys. The lodgepole pines stick with sap. Paper peeling off the birch instead of charcoal words, worlds within worlds. No longer power line, radio tower, skyscraper. Here, I stack up. Everything stacks up. We camp in a bowl of hot oats, navigating the sky for my reflection in 2 hands, the morning dew in a columbine, fractioned into multitudes. Thank you. I was also referencing Walt Whitman with that last line, fractioned into multitudes, because he's an American poet. He is all about how we contain multitudes within our bodies. So even though I am from Washington, D.C., I'm a college student in Philadelphia, both of which are pretty big cities, and I consider myself to be a city girl. I can still be outside in the outdoors. and have that identity as a backpacker as well. More water. Not sponsored. I'm not used to talking so much. This next poem is called Girls Overheard While Playing Chess. And the fun thing about this poem is that it's an abecedarian. So it goes in order of the English alphabet, A. And I don't know how well it translated into the Cyrillic alphabet. It probably didn't translate well at all, but that was the original intent, because this poem is all about young becoming successful in it, and because they're young girls, are also just learning about the alphabet, learning how to use their words with power. And the other thing that this poem was inspired by is a painting by 16th century painter Sofonisba Anguissola. She was one of the few women painters, a noblewoman whose father was a painter, so that's why she had the access and resources to be a painter as well. And she had two other sisters who she also was very intellectual with, and she played chess with them. So she painted a very beautiful painting. She was very new. She was just learning the rules of the game, whereas the oldest sister had the queen in her hand, which is the most powerful piece in chess. So kind of showed all the stages of learning through her different sisters, and using the chess game as a metaphor for the intellect. So this is Girls Overheard While Playing Chess. Analyze the board. Are you sure you want to play bishop so close to my wrist? The king is in check. Take him now. Don't settle for castling unless you're prepared to sweep dust. Remember the enemy and capture en passant. Find an opening to octopus through. Even Goliath fall to the ground. Look, this is like the horse we fed with sugar cubes. I wonder if she runs wild now or still jumps through hoops. Why do only knights get to joust? Let me wield my wit. Let logic belong to you and to me both. Why do men insist on their own necessity? You owe me that black pawn and $15 for lunch. This queen is like my mom. She can go anywhere, render the universe useless. Last week, you threw a drum because your dress came undone. This is like ruins. This is like false victory. Checkmate. No fair. You started on white. Remember how it feels. The electric thrill of winning. This is not a game. This is life. This is xenon smeared across the lips of women yoked to others' expectations. I'd be a zillionaire if I got a penny each time I zigzagged past your no. Thank you. I think of this as a very empowering poem, especially the last line about denial and belief that you are not competent or skilled enough to do something. The poem that I'm closing with is called Lessons on Living. And overall, I think it's just a plea for love and a plea for connecting with your inner self, your true self, and connecting with the love you have for everyone through the avenue of listening, of having an open ear to people's sorrows, to their heartache. And by listening to them, you can make people feel accepted, make them feel like they belong, open up their vulnerabilities, and form stronger connections and community. I was inspired to write this poem. I think the heart of this poem is with the conch shell, your ear, and you can hear the waves of the ocean inside of it. You can hear this reminder of the place that it came from. And that's at the heart of the poem and the first image that I started with. Lessons on living. Once ancient ocean full of fossil, not yet fossilized. Now solid land we stand upon, gentle animals. There against the foaming hem of sea sits a conch shell, a reminder of life left behind not so long ago. Listen. Please listen. Please, please press the conch shell up against the ear of your heart to carve canyons. Please build a raft out of fallen trees and ride the river until it relinquishes. When grief, that gargantuan glacier, grinds through solid rock, leaving behind valleys of loneliness. Please put on a warm coat and admit this reminder of your aliveness. When fear erupts deep within the earth, please let truth evaporate and steam into the sky. Please let yourself beginning of the beginning and the end of the end. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your beautiful poems, your lovely stories, and the opportunity to hear it tonight. And you told us it's the longest you've performed so far, and this is curious, and we're lucky to have you for this time with us. Now I'm gonna start asking you some questions, and I'm going to invite the audience as well, guys. Feel free to send your questions to us, and I'll be happy to share them with Sophia. And the first question I want to open with is on your website. There is a description that runs: Sophia Hall lives a double life, poet by day and secret agent by night. And I must say that I was very intrigued by this phrase. Could you share a little bit of a story behind this phrase?
Yeah, of course. So I'm so glad you asked about that. I think I kind of put that as my opening sentence of my bio because I want people to be intrigued, to kind of grab their attention, to be like, oh, who is this girl? And the reason why I chose that description is because I feel like I do so much work besides my poetry that it's hard to encapsulate into one word. It's kind of like it would be a multi-hyphenate situation where you have sister, daughter, student, athlete, etc. The list just keeps going on and on. I'm involved in so many different things, in community engagement, in musical theater, in advocacy work, and creating literacy spaces, in instructing writing, and it's just hard to fit it all into one description. So I just kind of wrote it when I was 15 years old, and I wanted to make people feel intrigued, to keep them on their toes, and to also give myself a sense of agency as well.
It's beautiful. And I must say that you're probably one of the youngest poets we've had in our series. So and we are very honored to have you and have your perspective on the poetic life as well. And I also noticed that you work across like multiple forms of art, like flash fiction and visual art, and I went through your Instagram, and your collages are amazing, like very meticulous work. And I'm wondering, how do you decide which medium to use for particular like story or message?
That's a really good question because I do write in many different genres. I write plays, I write memoir, I write flash fiction, all on top of my poetic practice. And then I also am a dancer, so sometimes I danced ballet until I was 10 years old. And I've never composed anything, but like I am very musical. I play piano, as you saw in my poetry, and I've also played the violin, as well as my art. Like you mentioned, I do collaging, and I talked about oil painting in the south of France. I think I'll just narrow in to writing for now. I think that a lot of the tools of poetry help me with other mediums. The brevity of poetry, the ability to distill things down into its most essential form is really helpful for my playwriting when you want to write really accurate and authentic dialogue between two made up characters. You want to make sure that you're actually saying something that is true to what a human would say. And most of my plays that I've written, they really investigate the relationships between two or three characters. So when I really want to do a deep dive into these intrapersonal relationships, that's when I would switch to a play format. For example, I wrote this one play called Boy with Pearl Earring that investigated this boy who was going to prom and what he was wearing, like his tuxedo, and I had all the different accessories that he was wearing talk to each other. And that was really fun. And then I had this very humorous play called The Sisterhood of the Spaghetti Stained Sweater, which was all about these two sisters' sweater that they shared between them. But then one of them got sauce spilled on it and got super mad at the other sister. And then it was just really fun to write that conflict, to write a play that people could come together, worries of their hard day, and then just laugh at the ridiculousness of the situation. And I was actually lucky enough to have that play performed at UPenn through their One Acts Play Festival. So I was really
Wonderful.
excited to sit in the audience and listen to everyone's laughter from the words that I wrote. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so fun.
So during your like several times, like, oh, I had so much fun writing this poem, and this is very unusual because normally, I can't say always, but very often you hear, poets describe their process as a lot of suffering. They kind of like the poem has to go through it and kind of like pains them to so lightly. Can you tell us about how you came to write poetry and what kind of emotions does it give to you? What your process looks like? And there is also a question from the audience that I'm going to follow up with.
So I think it's a little bit of both. When I first came to writing poetry, it was from a place of pain, of suffering, and trying to put my pain onto the page in order to heal. And sometimes I will have poems floating around in my body for months, probably maybe even years at a time before I even have the ability to process and put it down. But I think that because writing poetry is cathartic and it's like a release onto the page, I'm able to make the writing process kind of enjoyable because I love language. I love alliteration. I love coming up with metaphors and using similes and personification. I just have so much fun that I just can't contain it. And I want people, when they read my poem, to be like, wow, Sophia had fun writing this poem. Because I use a lot of sound play. I think it's called like sonic play. I want to make words sound like each other, especially in the stand-up poem about my piano when I talk about the piano sneezing and wheezing out for Elise, and I just had fun keeping going with that E sound. It was kind of like a roller coaster. How many words can I use that have that E sound? But when I first started writing poetry, I think it was in second grade when my teacher introduced a poetry unit of haiku, which is a Japanese form of poetry, and we were supposed to write about the cherry blossoms, which are very famous in Washington, D.C. They're kind of a symbol of peace. They're all around the tidal basin. And I learned about this ancient form of Japanese poetry, the haiku, and I wrote about the cherry blossoms. And I think ever since then, I thought of poetry as a way to connect across cultures and also connect myself to the world that I'm living in.
It's beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. And there are so many questions coming in, and I'm going to start asking them because otherwise people are going to be upset that they didn't get to hear, your thoughts about it. During the reading, you explained the many different formats of poems that you write, often adapting formats from other cultures. Where did you discover some of these formats? You just answered about haiku, but I think you've mentioned so many other like ghazals and others. So we would love to hear more about them.
Yeah, so the formats I think that I used in this reading were the guzzles and the abecedarian. So the discovery of these formats, I have to credit to my wonderful instructors and of the workshops that I've been fortunate enough to take over the years. My biggest supporter has been this organization called Writopia Lab. It's a nonprofit based out of New York City, but now is also in Washington, D.C. And they have fabulous workshops for teen writers. And during the pandemic, I had so much free time that I just took as many workshops as I could. And because they were all on Zoom, I could take workshops from California. I could take workshops from New York City. And through their fabulous instructors, I was introduced to these formats. And now that I am also in college and I took a poetry workshop, and my homework is literally to read poems, I discover new forms from my homework, which is really lucky of me.
It's wonderful. And there is a question also about you as a youth poet laureate. What does it mean to you to be youth poet laureate, and what kind of goals do you have for this kind of nomination for you?
To be a youth poet laureate, for me, it means to be an ambassador of poetry in general and to be an ambassador of my hometown of Washington, D.C., to capture it through my poetry and to advocate for the community through my poetry. Through my laureateship, I had the opportunity to perform at the Kennedy Center and to teach poetry workshops to like kids as young as 4 years old. And I've also taught workshops to people who are in their 70s. So it really shows that poetry can help people intergenerationally. I think my role as a youth poet laureate is to be someone that people look up to, and I want to be that role model for younger people in my community, to give them guidance, to give them advice, maybe even help you with your essay if you need it. I've had people DM me on Instagram saying that they were starting their own literary magazine and were asking for my help with that. I think that that's really, really sweet. And I remember being in their shoes, and I remember just starting off on my poetry journey. And I think it's amazing that now I am in a mentor role, even though I am so young and I'm still on my journey as well. But I can kind of be the person holding a lantern and showing people the light and the journey that I'm going on. And
That's so sweet.
yeah, that's basically what I think it means to.
And since people kind of like now you're kind of switching from being a mentee into a mentoring role, who has been the people who supported you along your way?
Oh my gosh, so many people I cannot be more thankful for. My poetry mentors, My very first one was Ellen Bass, who is a poet that lives in San Francisco. Ever since I took her poetry workshop when I was 13 years old and everybody else in the workshop was 60, I just knew that I was in for a wild ride. Another mentor that I have is Richard Blanco. He was the poet for Obama's inauguration, and he now lives in Miami, and I visited him over Thanksgiving break, and he gave poetry advice, and he came up to DC for a book festival, and I was able to see him. But after taking many workshops with him, I now know craft. I know the craft of poetry. I know about line breaks, and I know about what kind of voice I want to bring to my poem. And then the third poetry mentor inspiration, I would say, is Ada Limon, who is the current Poet Laureate of the United States. Her poem, A New National Anthem, I responded to it in the 16 Rivers Press contest and wrote multiple choice, what is the national anthem? That won grand prize. So I was really honored when I won the grand prize, and based on that experience of response poetry, I continued working with 16 Rivers Press to create another series of response poetry where we sent books to teenagers around the nation for them to read and then pick a poem to respond to, and then we published their response poems. And it was a very much full circle moment. And I have Ada Limon to thank for that.
That's beautiful. And I have a question. So like, you've created a project where you kind of spread poetry among the teens and among other generations of people. Like, why do you think it's important, and what did poetry give you as you were coming of age?
I think that spreading poetry is important because right now the US is in a literacy crisis. Most kids can't read that are in 5th grade can't read at that 5th grade level. And I think that poetry is a new fun way for kids to access literature and to access words in a way that isn't boring English class 5-paragraph essay by the book. For me, I loved English. I loved learning. I still love learning. I never had a problem with that. But still, poetry was the tool that helped me stay immersed in that environment of learning. I think without poetry, I would have felt really lost. I would have not found an outlet for my creativity. And without poetry, I think a lot of the emotions that I feel on a day-to-day basis would have gone unprocessed. And I think, to sum it all up, poetry gives voice. It allows people to find their own voice, their voice in text and their voice speaking aloud. And by writing poems, they can feel more confident in themselves, in their writing, and in their speaking skills. And I think that that is the most important thing that poetry can give us.
Wonderful. It's so, I mean, this is, I don't know if that's poetry or you're just wise beyond your years. But this is so nice to have your wise words and kind of like see how much care you have for the coming generations, for the spread of the poetry. And it's so lovely to have you here. And unfortunately, our event is coming to an end. But I would like to thank you for the opportunity to host it tonight, and to the American Center in Moscow for creating space and opportunity for this event. Until we meet again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Have a great night.
Thank you. Have a great night, guys. Bye-bye.